Kicking off at number 5, poisonous predators. Since the dawn of time, our species has been afraid of snakes, and for good reason really. Indiana Jones was onto something after all. Thanks to evolution, we know that ancient humans were tree-dwelling mammals, and our species quickly learned that those very same trees were shared with some pretty terrifying serpents, and we quickly learned that the importance of telling the difference between a tree branch and a snake tail was literally a matter of life and death. Because of this, our eyes gradually evolved to see colours much more vividly, down to the fact that the most opportunistic of our ancestral mammal ancestors would be better enabled to avoid the tree-sharing snakes and not end up, well, dead. While in a 2011 Japanese study, they proved that humans are extremely sensitive to biologically threatening stimuli, and researchers found that children were intrinsically rapid at detecting pictures of snakes hidden in flowers. It's not just snakes though, because spiders also factor into this portion of our brain power, and it is widely considered that arachnophobia is so much more prevalent in women due to the fact that during our hunter-gatherer days, if a woman were bit by a spider, her offspring would likely die without her.
Coming in at number 4, green corpse. This discovery comes from a couple who had just moved into a New York apartment and noticed a terrible smell coming from one of the cupboards. So, of course, they decided to investigate. And what they discovered was truly disturbing. Wrapped in a shower curtain, they found a dead body, as well as a note from the victim's killer. The note also apologized for the smell, so that's nice. The body was that of Sydney Harris, a 64-year-old ex-con who was the previous tenant. To make matters worse, the building manager had only decided to rent out the property after Sydney had disappeared for a while, offering up the apartment to the couple on the condition that they clear it out before they move in. In at number 3, trapdoor. Well, this would just be bloody terrifying. Imagine moving into a new home and discovering a trapdoor in the basement, leading down into the earth below. Yep, that's exactly what happened to a Redditor who claimed the trapdoor led into an 8-foot by 4-foot wide cement well that was filled with water, yet there were no pipes, making the trapdoor oddly suspicious. The Redditor later filled in the well with stones and eventually sold the house. The trapdoor, however, has never been explained. Coming in at number 2, mummified body. This would be every new homeowner's worst nightmare, moving into a new pad only to discover that the old tenants are still there, just no longer living. After a house owner failed to pay their mortgage, the bank repossessed the house and sold it in an auction. Enter the dead body. The bank didn't inspect the house before selling it, so the new owner stumbled across the body of the previous owner, who had died of natural causes, hence why she was no longer paying her bills. The body had been preserved by the salty air in the seaside town, causing it to mummify. According to neighbours, the previous owner had been in bad health and she rarely had any visitors. It's kind of sad, no one should have to die alone, and no one should have to find a mummified body in their new home. Spitting facts here. Finally, in at number 1, frozen body. In a newly purchased home on Bainbridge Ave in Fordham Manor, a contractor named Tony Avedian made an unfortunate and grisly discovery: a frozen body. Yep. Poor Tony discovered a lifeless corpse that he had initially believed to be sleeping, but oh boy was he wrong. The body had been frozen with injuries on the face and the head, yet no one can give an accurate cause or time of death. According to neighbours, the house had been unoccupied for a year, yet there was frequent activity in and around the house, particularly homeless people and drug users. However, no one ever thought to call the police. Weird. Well,
kicking it off at number 5, we have eye contact. You may not realise it, but eye contact is an incredibly powerful force, and is connected with humanity's earliest survival patterns. As we evolved, children who could attract eye contact from adults had the best chance of being fed and cared for. Today, newborn babies will instinctively lock eye contact with their caregivers, which has had a powerful impact in the adult mind. A huge part of this has to do with the whites of our eyes. Compared to the other 220 non-human primates, we are the only species that has evolved a large white area of the eye. Chimpanzees can easily be staring at one thing while their head is pointed in the complete opposite direction, and we'd have no idea because we're attuned to follow their eye movement. For humans, eye contact was vital in our early development and gave us an almost instant understanding of each other's intentions without ever speaking a word. However, this fact can be easily manipulated by predators. In the wild, if you lock eye contact with a bear or a silverback gorilla, you're pretty much mincemeat. Direct eye contact is seen as a challenge to the rest of the animal kingdom, but it's almost instinctively done by humans. So, the next time you're at a zoo, make sure to keep your head down and leave the staring contest for another time. Which leads us to our next point, number 4. Coming in at number 4, public speaking.
Right. So when Rigby got his samples back from the laboratory, he made a startling discovery.
And perhaps Ross wouldn't have been laughed at if everyone knew that deep down he was just acting on an instinctual fear. Nah, I'm just kidding, that scene is hilarious. Of course they'd still laugh at him, but the fear of public speaking isn't just reserved for nervous fictional characters because it's a universal fear felt by people across the planet. Have you ever been in a situation where you've got to give a presentation, but the night before you just can't seem to get any sleep? The next day you've got butterflies in your stomach and you're drenched in sweat. Well, the answer is that the root of this fear is actually built into our DNA. The fear of public speaking actually comes from our amygdala, the part of our brain that regulates emotion, which is then hypersensationalized by the reactions of each and every face in an audience, subconsciously picking them apart to see which, if any, people pose a genuine threat to our survival. Oftentimes this results in a crippling stage fright where some people, when faced with the terrifying reality of public speaking, simply just stare blankly into the crowd. The continued perception of this threat overloads their instinctual brain and it results in a primitive level staring contest, much like when a deer is literally caught in the headlights. Swinging in next at number 3, the dark. Have you ever been lying in bed in complete darkness at an unholy hour, just wondering why the hell you can't get off to sleep? Is it because enemies are nearby? Cannot save your progress? Well, kind of, but there's actually a little bit more to it. Fear of the dark, while also being an incredible Iron Maiden track, is actually one of the most intrinsic instincts that humanity possesses. Nearly all children and some adults maintain a completely founded physiological trauma of the things that go bump in the night. Why? Because, well, the grinding anxiety that a fear of the dark generates acts as a check and limiting mechanism against reckless behavior that would have otherwise ended up with our ancestors just roaming out into the Serengeti and getting eaten by a big bad scary predator. See, here's the thing, because for a large portion of humanity's early days we weren't exactly the tip top apex predators that we are today. We had to earn it by capitalizing on our evolutionary advantages, but back in the day our ancestors quickly learned that many predators preferred the cover of darkness to hunt, and in that we developed a shared, clearly signposted consciousness that said stay out of the dark because that's where all the crazy monsters that will eat us are. So the next time someone laughs at you for being scared of the dark, tell them that you've got your ancestors to thank because they were the smart ones. Next up at number 2, heights. Oh, Hans Gruber, you sorely misguided man. As my editor Dylan pointed out, Alan Rickman actually had his own massive fear of heights, and when filming that scene, the crew lied to him about the timing of his harness release. So what you're actually seeing is the one-take face of betrayal. Poor guy. But Alan Rickman wasn't alone with his fear of heights, because we all feel it in some ways or another at varying degrees. In actual fact, an instinctual reaction to heights is triggered when your inner ear feels an exaggerated gravitational pull and tells your other senses all about it. It immediately alerts the rest of your body of the distance that exists between you and the ground, and well, if that distance exceeds say 30 feet or so, your body will instinctually go into a panic mode triggered by the fear of falling from such a height. The thing is though, this fear is fascinating because unlike other similar fears, while our body is hardwired to experience a shift in gravitational pull, we don't develop this fear at birth. It isn't ancestrally ingrained in our brains despite having the faculties to do so. In actual fact, this fear is developed after a baby begins to learn locomotive skills, and it's been found that people only learn to be scared of heights after they begin to perceive space and movement. So basically, we just got far too used to swimming upside down in our mum's wombs. Oh, why did I just say that? Mum's wombs. And finally, coming in at our number 1 spot, death. And it goes with the territory, really. We're all on a pretty level playing field when it comes to evacuating this mortal coil. And as my buddy Ben Franklin said way back in 1789, in this world, nothing can be said to be certain except death and taxes. And while everyone's kind of indifferent about fearing taxes, I hope, death takes the top spot. Humanity instinctively seeks to preserve ourselves, as in we are hardwired to survive. Just take a look at fight or flight and the lengths that people like Aaron Ralston will go to survive. Any threat that humanity perceives is stoked by the eternal furnace of the fear of dying. But there is one modicum of the instinctual fear of death that kind of takes the cake: existential death anxiety, which, while also being an awesome band name, is a fear found exclusively in humans. It is both the blessing and the curse of our existence, the double-edged sword of humanity, the fear of what happens when life ends, and one of the reasons that has driven our species to often do equal parts crazy and equal parts amazing things. Because when our species climbed down from the trees and banged their science homework between two rocks to start a fire, we began a chain reaction that inevitably resulted in us asking the scariest question of them all: what happens when the lights go out?
In at 5, hundreds of bats. This is one of my worst nightmares, moving into a new home and discovering it is completely infested with bats. And that is exactly what happened to Calvin Oshoey, who purchased a home in Whitehorse and after only 2 months discovered he was not the only one living there. The bats were found to be in the attic, walls and even the ceiling. Calvin worked tirelessly to seal the house so no other bats could gain entry, but what's worse is that every winter bats migrate south. However, they also return to the same spot every single year. Eventually, Calvin had no choice but to build a sanctuary outside of his home in hopes that the bats would decide to reside there instead.
Or fight or flight. Under cases of extreme stress, a response is triggered in the human body called fight or flight. It involves some pretty complicated hormonal shifts in the body, but the basic signs are an increase in heart rate, tunnel vision, dry mouth, and dilated pupils. The body needs to survive, and in most cases remove itself from danger in whatever way it can. But when the body can't run, some pretty insane things can happen. In 2003, Aaron Ralston went hiking in the Utah Canyons. It was all going great until Aaron slipped near a ravine, and a boulder became dislodged, trapping him next to the wall of a deep, narrow canyon. His right arm was pinned between the boulder and the rock. Fight or flight kicked in, and for Aaron, the only response left was to fight. Over a period of 127 hours, Aaron realized that the only action left was to cut his own arm off. He used his body weight to bend his own arm until the boulder snapped his forearm, and then he began sawing through the bone. Aaron's instincts took over, and he survived. Bringing it in at number 3, we have fear itself. A deer in the headlights. We all know the classic image of a woodland creature freezing when they see imminent danger. But there's actually quite a few crazy reasons why mammals have a freeze response. Some believe that it's a last-ditch effort after fight or flight has failed to try and be left alone. If they can remain as still as possible, maybe that bear won't see them and maybe they won't be eaten. It's actually down to how your brain has been wired to survive through evolution. And a moment of pure fear is triggered by cells in the brain that are responsible for extinction memories. Basically, anytime you freeze in fear, you're remembering every time your ancestors thought they would be eaten by a lion, but somehow managed to overcome that fear and get the hell out of there. If not, you wouldn't really be here. So when you see someone involved in a crisis, their response to freeze is pretty terrifying. Because if they somehow can't snap out of it and take back control of their own body, then they're not going to be passing on those extinction memories to anyone anytime soon. Next up at number 2, we have our penultimate point: drowning. Humans have a deep-rooted fear of open water for a reason. We can't breathe down there. Also, krakens. The terrifying thing is, we're hardwired to have what is known as the instinctive drowning response. When a person finds themselves on the cusp of drowning, they enter an instinctive state of preservation. Movement becomes impossible, the person bobbing listlessly with their mouth level to the water. It's not like in the movies. The legs don't kick and the arms don't flail. The response is so undramatic that people often drown in busy bodies of water without even being noticed by other swimmers or lifeguards. Then an even scary response can kick in when being rescued. While the body is under a drowning response, when they grab something buoyant, that body will mercilessly hold on until it's safe. More often than not, this is the person trying to save them. This is why search and rescue swimmers are taught to punch a person straight in the face to knock the victim out before taking control of their body. There have been reports of both the drowning person and the lifeguard trying to save them slipping under the water, never to return, all because of the human body's instinctive response to survive. And finally, bringing it in at number 1, we have a mother's instinct. Now, we all love our mums, and they love us too, like to the point of insanity. A mother's instinct is so strong that in some cases, they've pretty much developed superpowers to make sure that their tiny bundles of joy are kept safe. There's not really a lot of science behind it either. It's just somehow, sometimes, it happens. The bond between mother and child is something hardwired, an ancient instinct that has kept us alive for thousands of years. In 2014, Chelsea Camp was pet sitting for a friend when their dog went into a rage and attacked Chelsea's daughter. Well, Chelsea fought back with her fists and her teeth. At one point, Chelsea even bit the dog's damn ear off. Her daughter survived. In 2000, a 40-year-old mother of 7 became the first woman in medical history to give herself a C-section. In an isolated cabin with no help for miles, Inez Ramirez Perez was driven by pure desperation to save her unborn child. She cut into her own abdomen with a 6-inch blade and safely birthed her baby. You go, Mrs. Perez. A mother's instinct is something that you really, really, really don't want to cross.